Best time ever. Alrighty. Sorry about that. Alright, here we go. So I love concepts. Like I think they're so interesting to talk about and think about and read about and so on. But anyway, so it's this concept of justice, but it also helps us by giving us particular types of justice. Um, there's your notes. There's the actual justice article, right? Not very long. This is about so, and again, I'll post. I think it's already posted actually. The PowerPoint. They sort of leave it up to you to pick the and like the research style that you're going to use, APA or MLA. They throw in Chicago and Harvard, which I just no one ever uses, but I mean somebody somewhere must. But anyway, so just trying to give you the citation for the reference page or the works cited page, which so you can use whichever one you want. Um, a lot of people think MLA is easier, but I mean MLA and APA are probably equal difficulty. So anyway, that's what that's there for, to give. Um, all right, so here we are. So your job is to pick a subject. Actually, hold on a sec. Let me see if I can do chat. I'm going to ask people to respond in chat. You can do it actually. I don't know. Can you do it privately here? Maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe just everyone. It doesn't much matter. I just want to ask what subject people are thinking of doing. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Nice. So if you can give me that, that'd be good. Then I have like as I explain it. Interesting. All right. So no one cares about student loans, I see. Interesting. My God, this world. All right, good deal. Excellent. So, so a lot of this is done towards the NFL. I actually think I do. I made up an example to help people for student loans. So luckily, I've basically thought about both of these two subjects. All right. So the idea is you're writing about justice and the subject. You're trying to narrow this essay in order and to discuss one of the participants in the subject and one of the types of justice. Okay, because in each of these subjects there are many, different. I'm going to call them participants because I was at first I was like I'll just call them players, except for that in NFL that actually means just the players, right? So for the NFL, for example, you have the players, you have the league, you have fans, you can even have the owners, you can have so there are a bunch of different groups that are involved. Student loans, same thing. You have students, you have banks, you have the university. Your job is to try to pick one of them, like one of the participants, and discuss a certain type of justice. Um, these are the three types, right? Retributive justice has to do with punishment, basically, right? So punishment for wrongdoing. Distributive justice has to do with sort of spreading out. It, it's like it's almost compensation, but it's the burdens and benefits to everybody. Like sort of everybody gains from this sort of type of justice, right? Retributive just means like somebody did something wrong, they are punished. Distributive sort of means like everybody needs to be compensated, right? So it's sort of a broader idea of justice, right? And then corrective justice means like justice where you're doing something to correct a wrong, right? If you think of people being paid for like a lawsuit that they have, a civil lawsuit, so something went wrong and they sued somebody in their life, so then they get money for that. That's like corrective justice. Anyway, so you have those three, and we just have those definitions from that one article that they're giving us, right? Just to have us. Okay, so here's the deal with this. So this week, right, for week 7, your job is really just to focus on the subject. So whether it's the NFL or the student loan. So you're picking one of those articles, right, the one that you're going to focus on, and you're trying to really understand the different participants involved. That's what they want you to focus on for this week. So like week 8 is more about like, okay, let's then talk about how justice works. But before we do that, they want you to have a good grasp of the subject matter, right? Like, that's why they're having this thing. Like, so you basically are like, what's your main response to the reading? Did you know about it? You didn't know about it? What did you heard about it? What do you know, maybe a personal experience? I'm talking about the student loan one on that case. You're responding to the article, and you're sort of just giving your general thoughts. Then you're trying to go back and find some specific part of the article that maybe you didn't focus on or don't remember much, but is interesting, and try to sort of carefully evaluate or focus on that specific part of it, right, that you might not have known, right? So like if I say student loan, we all have a sort of a general thing goes into our head about what student loans are. Even the NFL and concussion, something goes in our head, sort of general, all right? So then I look at the article, and then I might like not have thought about some specific aspect of the subject. And so you find that, you talk about that, and how it relates to the larger idea. So they're just trying to get you to read the article, respond, to the general article, then find something specific in the article and discuss how that relates to the general idea. That's mainly what week 7 is about. Let me see if I can find. Right, and then I just put the articles again because I don't. But then I just did this one, right? So the goal of this week is essentially you want to totally understand like the different participants, okay? So you want to be able to say, in this subject, student loans or NFL and concussion, who is involved, and that we talked about, right? So the student loan, you got students, you may have students, you may have parents, you may have the school, you may have the banks, you may have the government, right? There's 5 major participants in this student loan thing. In the NFL, you've got the players, you could even do the agents, you've got the owners, you've got the actual NFL, like the corporation of it. You've got television, right? So all of these things are part of the main subject. So your job this week is basically to really understand all the participants in this subject and the relationship between them, right? So you're trying to be able to understand, and that goes to the third one too, sort of like the different pressures that are acting on the participants, right? So we talked about, for the last class or the last essay, this idea that there are these external forces, right, that sort of affect the way you understand things or read things or write things. Okay, so now we're sort of looking at, yes, external forces or these participants and how they exert influence on each of the things, right? So you're a player, you have a concussion or you got hit really hard, and much of your desire is to not have a concussion, right? Because you want to keep playing, I guess, right? So you have a certain motivation, you have certain goals, you have certain, and so each participant in these different subjects has the same thing. They have a certain goal they're looking for, they have a certain um, sort of reason for being. They have motivations. They're being acted on by other influences and so on. So that's what this is all about. Trying to get a handle on, all right, so who's involved in this whole student loan thing? Who's involved in this whole NFL concussion thing? And what are their different motivations or their different purposes, their different roles? So that's sort of my summary of what this week is about. Okay. So what? So then, right? Now this is projecting a little bit into the future, but you can be thinking about this when you're figuring out the different participants and like what their roles are. You can be trying to think of the different types of justice. Um, so you're looking for a thesis, right? So the thesis for this essay, you're drawing a conclusion, which is what a thesis is, right? You're drawing a conclusion, which is like taking a position that has to do with the particular type of justice that you've decided to pick and the group that you will focus on. So if you're doing the NFL, you're talking about the players, or you're talking about the owners, or you're talking about the television. If that, I don't know if that's really going to be relevant, but so you're sort of focusing on one of the groups, and you're talking about justice in relationship to them. So you're trying to, like, if you're doing the players for NFL, and you're trying to figure out the type of justice that has to do with them, right? So they're put in this position where they're in danger of seriously harming themselves forever in order to do this job, but of course they know the risks, so they agree to it. But also, do they really know about CTE and the stuff that's going to actually could possibly drive them crazy or make them kill themselves or whatever? Like, there's a bunch of stuff, right? So you're trying to talk about justice in relationship to a certain group. If you're doing student loans, you could talk about students, right? And what type of justice best connects with their situation, right? Like, so if you're being made to pay way too much or take on way too much debt in order to get this degree, and you don't even know if you're going to get a job in this whole thing. So what kind of, like, is the best type of justice to, like, I don't know, put like the heads of the banks in jail? I mean, that'd be awesome, but probably it's not going to solve a whole lot, right? Like, where you just punish people. So that just punishing people, that may not be the best type of justice that would help those people, that situation. So then, you trying to decide, well, distributive justice, where everybody sort of gains, because people who've been harmed by something need to sort of be compensated, which is what justice is sort of about. So harm versus compensation. Anyway, that's the general idea. And I'm talking about here, I'm just talking about, you want a thesis that makes a clear statement about the position, and then you also want three supporting ideas, because I always say there should be three supporting ideas. Okay, so here's my example for student loan debt. Student loan debt involved groups might include parents, schools, banks, government, students, companies. I don't know what the hell companies, what do you think those are? Who knows? Anyways, so then I'm going to pick distributive justice, and I'm going to focus on students. Meaning, so let me read this. Okay, so one way to help you think about the subject in order to generate strong thesis statements is to find a way to use the word while. This is actually like a template idea, right? By using the word while, it allows you to say the most. You're able to be like, while this may be true, there's also this. So just using that template, just using that word, will help you have a thesis that you can develop more. So I have, while college students are somewhat aware of the financial commitment they make when they enroll in college, the principles of distributive justice reveal that the students are bearing more and more of the burden within the system of higher education and realizing fewer and fewer benefits. So I'm taking a stand of some sort. And I'm doing it through sort of the lens, right? The lens of distributive justice. That'd be a way to think about it. All right, so I'm going to look at their situation through this lens, and what happens is I'm figuring out that they're actually being harmed more than they're being helped. So if you brought distributive justice into the situation, the idea would be like, okay, we want to make sure that people aren't being harmed, more than they're being helped. You want there to be some sort of even level idea where everybody's being compensated more than they're just being harmed. Especially for something like education, where it's the theory used to be, right, that it's supposed to help you in society with jobs, social mobility, and all that. And then once I have some sort of big idea, now I'm trying to think of like 3 supporting ideas, which is the game for all essays. All essays are about, let me find a thesis, let me find 3 main ideas. Or, let me find 3 main ideas, and then I'll create a thesis out of it. That also works for some people. Depends sort of like how your mind works. All right, so in this world, I'm like, I have my 3 ideas. I'm going to probably do this next week also, or get more into this, because this is really a lot about when you start to apply justice to the subject after you've figured out, how everybody else is involved. So these are my 3 main ideas that I came up with. So I'm going to explain distributive justice and how it connects basically to higher education. That's my first main goal. When the principles of distributive justice are applied to the higher education system, it becomes clear that students are the most valuable group who are most necessary to the success of higher education. I'll talk about distributive justice and find quotes from it and so on. I don't know if I agree with this stuff. But anyway, this is what I came up with. And then I'll do the financial burden. So my first one's basically going to be like, look, without students, you have nothing. My second one's going to be like, by the way, students are the ones who are suffering the most in this situation. If you look at all the other groups, who is suffering the most, that's where you apply justice, right? Because justice, the theory about justice is that you're applying it to a group that is suffering or being harmed. Right, and that's where you train your attention. You go, okay, how can we fix it so they're not being harmed? Right now, you're like, look, students are totally necessary, and they're the ones who are getting screwed the most with these debts and so on. And then I'll prove this idea that while they're the most important part of this equation, and while they're the ones who are sort of being harmed the most, they're also the ones who have the least ability to change anything. So I will explain this idea, because within all of those groups, right, this is why it's super important to do the first part where you figure out who the groups are. Because one thing you want to be able to do is be like, all right, well, if you look at all the groups here, like who is suffering the most from student loan debt? I mean, you can even be like, oh yeah, I mean, parents, maybe they help and they go into debt a little bit, whatever. The schools are getting their money, the banks are getting their interest rates, the government's getting their payback and slight interest rates or whatever. Students are just, they're the ones who have to deal, basically. I still wonder what I meant by companies, huh? This is what happens when you just write. All right. All right, same idea. So I did another example for the NFL. Right, so I'm going to try to point out this concept that, yeah, who's being most harmed in this situation? I'm going to say that the players are. So I'm going to pick the players. So while football players are somewhat aware of the risks they are taking by playing for the NFL, under the principle of distributive justice, the players are bearing more and more of the burden of the NFL's success and realizing fewer and fewer benefits. Same idea. I'm picking the group that's being harmed the most. I'm going to pick a certain system of justice, and I'm going to show the problem, and I'm also supposed to try to explain how, here's what would happen if we applied this, right? Here's how the system would change if we were being fair, like, and we weren't super interested in just harming people. Again, you're taking a position, you're drawing a conclusion. That's sort of the main thing for this essay. And again, this is another pattern, right? The idea, so my first one will be like, here's what distributive justice is. I will define it, explain it. I'll explain it in relationship to the NFL and to the players and to concussions. So I'll sort of get that set up for them. And then here we go into topic sentences. Again, like I said, I'll do some of this next week because we're not really in topic sentence world for the essay yet. But just to give you sort of a broad scope of it, I guess. They're the most valuable assets in the league. So literally, it's the same. I'm using the same pattern as I did with students. So I'm going to say students are the most important. You need to recognize that. I'm going to say the players are most important because without the players, guess what? No NFL, right? Then I have this burdens and benefits, and trying to show that the players are harmed the most out of everybody, meaning they're the ones, and that's where that idea of concussions and harming themselves comes into it. And then my last point will be about the actual study, which is, if you haven't read it yet, I mean, one of the ideas in the study is that the study is done in a way that's sort of concealing truth. That's the problem with the study. It's not super out there with the, hey, this is dangerous. They're mostly being like, yeah, not so dangerous. And I think there's a connection. The title has to do with tobacco. And I think that comes from the fact that tobacco lawyers, like the people who represented tobacco companies back in the day, some of the same firms or whatever, also dealt with this subject. So they're trying to make this connection that, okay, you got a bunch of lawyers who are super pro at hiding information, because that's exactly what tobacco companies did for, decades. And now they're here turning their attention to the NFL, and what they're doing is they're massaging the data so that it's like, yeah, some people get hurt, but it's no big deal or whatever. It's not quite that bad, but that's the idea. Anyway, once you read the article. All right, I'm not going to go into all. I'm going to actually save that. Because the rest of this thing has to do with actual different paragraphs that you would write and how you would write them. But what I'm interested in right now is making sure people understand what they're trying to do for their subject. Okay, so here's what I'm going to ask people next. So you're going to pick one of the articles. That's also the idea. Obviously, for the NFL, they only give you the one. Isn't it lit up? Oh, there we go. But for the other ones, especially for, for student loan debt, they give you 3 different choices. Yeah, go for it, Anjo.
So, this week we are just picking up a participant school, bank, or college, and the form of justice we are going to talk about. And next week we are going to write a thesis and supporting ideas.
Exactly. So this week is very much focused. So wait, you're doing student loan, right? So what I want to know is sort of which article you're going to use. Yeah. So this week is basically just about the article. So if you're doing student loan, you're going to pick one of these articles: the benefit of borrowing, growing trend, or who will really benefit. You're going to pick one of those. Your job is to read it, obviously, understand it, and then figure out the different, what that article says about the different participants in the issue, right? So this article, talks about students this way. It talks about colleges this way. It talks about banks this way. So you're just trying to identify. You're trying to become familiar with the subject enough so that you know who's involved and sort of what each sector, what each participant, what role they play in the situation. You're trying to determine, um, who's being harmed, essentially, according to your article. So you are only going to pick one of the articles, and your job is to decide, okay, according to this article, here are the participants. They mention these people or these groups or whatever, and then they are clearly pointing out, who's being harmed by this and in what way they're being harmed. So it's very much just trying to get you to think about it, like to read the article and think about who's involved, what their role is, how they're being harmed or benefiting, and that's what you're posting on the discussion board. Then next week it's about applying the justice principle. You're going to pick one of the types of justices. You're going to sort of explain how it connects to your subject, and then develop a thesis for this essay. So I would say that that's basically the goal. I wanted to know, just to help people sort of push. Yeah, Tammy, go on.
What if the article only talks about like the people who are taking out the loans and not so much like the banks or
Right,
universities, something like that? Would
exactly.
that be anything different, or just talk about the people who are taking out the loans?
No, as long as you have, like, so right, that's the thing about choosing the article. So I would say if it's just mostly about those people, then you're going to focus on those people, but also you want to read it close enough so that there, because it can't just talk about them, right? It has to at least mention. You're right that it's not going to really talk about all the different groups and develop everybody's motives or whatever. But it should mention things. It should mention the bank, or should mention some other one. So it should give you something to also to include, even though it's going to be mainly about whatever. So if it's mainly about students and taking out loans, that's good. Then what's the problem or what's the issue? Like, what's that article talking about? Oh, okay. They're getting older and they, I still have this debt that they're, and they, so have they, has the degree helped them so that they can pay back their debt, or it hasn't? So you're trying to figure out, like, from your article, you're trying to identify other, if there are other groups. I would say it's fine. Like, you can totally use that, but you do want to be aware, right, that it's about this. It's talking about one group, but any problems that they have, or issues that they have, or if they're the group that's being harmed, somebody's harming them. Like, there's some problem, and as long as you can sort of point to that, then that's good enough. You don't need an article that's going to fully develop everybody's motives and so on.
Okay.
Good. Yeah. Oh, I forgot to type the last word. So I was just going to have people tell me which article they're thinking of using, just so, for no reason. I don't know, just to make people think. Um, Not that there's so many, but if you know already which one you're going to use, obviously I sort of know the NFL one. Now, let me see. Mhm. Right, and they sort of want people to know, like, right, like, there's a lot of reading this week and so on. I mean, it's not too much. Um, Oops. Let me find the rest. All right, the other thing they want you to practice, although you're not really turning it in, is this idea of being like very engaged as a reader, right? They're trying to model this idea that when you read, you do these things, meaning you're asking questions, you're trying to point out um, assumptions or logic the person's using. Like that's what the writer's reference section is about. So you're trying to be an engaged reader, and I guess that sort of goes a little bit to what Tammy said, meaning like even if they're not explicitly talking about different groups, you're trying to um, tease out different ideas that might exist, like assumptions that people are making when they're making their arguments. Questions that occur to you, like maybe they skipped over something or they're not really addressing something. This is a critical thinking exercise. So they're trying to get you to really spend time, and that's what this example is about that I'm sort of showing, right? Meaning, you're just, and it doesn't, I mean, the only way that I can say this in real life, like the way it helps, is that you don't really care about what you're writing on the side. They're just thoughts that occur to you, and you're jotting them down, right? Like it's not like, you're not in a situation of like giving a right answer or a wrong answer. You're just in the situation of I'm reading it, and sometimes when you write little things down, it helps you process the information, which I can attest to. That part is, in my mind anyway, it's totally true. It helps me a great deal if I'm reading stuff and I jot just a few words down about it. That's what they're trying to get people to do. Again, the point of this is sort of like my idea for a class like this in general, which is you're improving your thought process, right? You're trying to practice this process of thinking. This is a very explicit way to do this. You may not, I mean, people don't do this probably, forever, although some people probably do it forever. But you're just practicing this. You're practicing looking at each sentence and trying to tease out something, right? Trying and just jotting it down, right? So the title explains her position. Um, this assumes the thing. This is a thing to be concerned about. So it could be wrong or whatever. You could just be, writing, but it helps you process. It helps your mind sort of tune into things, so that you can start to recognize, when faulty assumptions are being made. Like so, if someone's making an argument and their assumption is incorrect. But this whole concept here is that you're trying to identify statements where people, mostly I'm looking for places where it sounds like people are drawing conclusions, right? And so that I can so I can be like, all right, this is a conclusion, like, but are they proving it, or they're just sort of saying it? Like this example here. So one glaring reason is that we've become a nation of hyper consumers. Like, all right, says you, the writer, but did you? Well, how do I know that? Is that so? This person, like, they write true? Question mark. Just because, like, all right, that's a pretty big statement, and how do you, I'm supposed to trust you or whatever? It's just that's the critical thinking. You're sort of like going through and like pointing out whether that ends up mattering or not. You know, not a huge point, but anyway. So that's what the writer's reference is doing to do, and it's a worthy exercise to do. So if you have your article, you're reading through your article. As you read, you're just jotting stuff down. That's all. I mean, it's not an official assignment as far as I'm concerned, but or no anyway. But that's what the whole theory is, at least for the writer's reference part of this week. And just you write stuff again. You could be completely wrong or misinterpreting it or whatever, but that's the way you train your mind to do this automatically. And in my mind, the idea is that you practice this very explicitly by writing words and so on, and then eventually you're reading, an opinion piece, and your mind's doing it automatically. It's questioning this, it's looking for evidence for that, and so on. And that's what they believe that one of the values of the course is, which I agree with. But right, and then it's about using quotes, but we can do that once we have sort of a draft going, I think. Right, so All right. Yeah. And so then I guess the last thing I have is this idea that, so you're doing the, basically, if I'm right, let me see here, though, just to be sure. I think that this, so the big thing was you already did, you turned in the final draft of the essay 2. So that happens, that took up till Tuesday. Essentially, I believe there's only this prompt left. So you're yeah, it's because it is more reading. So you're reading, and then you're doing this one prompt. So you want to give a response, right, that sort of demonstrates that you've looked at and or sort of done the thing we were just talking about, right? That you have sort of a clear and sort of deeper understanding of whatever the article is, which is what you're supposed to get if you do the thing that I was just showing you, right? So you read the article, you're sort of pointing these things out so that then when you do your response, you sort of have things you've created, ideas, and so you can say, here's it. And then when you do you're supposed to read and comment on 2 peer posts. You want to be able to ask people or push people, I guess, to as fully as possible explain what the different aspects. So you're not just summarizing, I guess is what my main point is. Like your goal is not really just to be like, this article is about this. You're really trying to use your analytical mind, and you're trying to be like, so the article's trying to do this, but it, maybe it doesn't give evidence for this one part, but it does give it for this other part. This is very convincing evidence, or this is not. Like you're trying to be more in depth as far as you go. Like just stating what the article is about and like its main ideas is not going to really cut it for this. You're trying to do, yeah, main ideas, supporting arguments, but also you're trying to use some of the analysis, like the analyzing thought process, right, where you're pointing out various things about the argument or assumptions that they make or places where they lack evidence or any of that stuff. So that's one of the things. And so when you're responding to your peers, you can sort of push them on that idea, right? So if they say, this article says this about that, and like, okay, do they prove it? How do they support that? Do they, push them to really try to look deep into the article as you can, look. So it's a little bit different. You're not just being asked to like summarize it, right? You're trying to be like, here is what it is, and then here is sort of a little bit of, my response to it and my analysis of it and how well it works or doesn't work, so on. Anyway, I think that would be my one thing. Because really, so this week, after you've done that essay, the essay number 2, you're really just focused on one discussion post and then responding to 2 peers. Where is it? Oh yeah, so I wrote this part right. And it's a good question. I mean, Tammy, your question was very good in the sense that you still like the ability to understand the relationship between the participants you should be able to still to do that, even though it's all about only one people, like one group or whatever. You should be able to sort of suss out, maybe not all of them because they don't, maybe not hit, but some other group. You can sort of figure that out and bring that forward, like more explicitly explain that. Like, okay, yeah, this is about that, but it's also about how the banks are making money or how the government's giving loans too easily or who knows whatever else they're talking about. You have some idea about the other participants based on what they say about yours. I guess that's more of the critical thinking business. And just for you guys in the back of your mind, as you're doing that, responding to it, whatever, you're also thinking about these like the theories of justice. You know, even though you're not really writing about that now, you're writing about that next week. But then I'm like, where's the? Maybe I really didn't. Right. So now you go. You have an initial response. You came across. So it's basically establish. Number one is basically about establishing what you know about the subject or what you've heard, like just in general. Maybe nothing. Maybe a few things. You may know some specific something about like I about this issue, right? Like I know a couple NFL players who've killed themselves who had CTE or whatever. So I'd be like, I sort of heard of that. I think that has to do with it. And then go back and find a specific passage that maybe doesn't really have to do with that, or it's like something that you really weren't thinking about, or some other aspect. Um, and bring that out and be like, oh, this part they actually talk all about whatever interest rates, or they talk about training camp and how what training camp for the NFL is like, right? So like you're trying to pull a paragraph where they that you didn't pay much attention to, and then suddenly trying to be like, all right, how does it connect to the broader subject? So one is here's my response to it, and here's what the subject is. Second one is here's this specific passage and sort of what it demonstrates or illuminates about the whole subject in general. Oh, those are just the articles. All right, good. Yeah, unshot.
So basically, this week, instead of writing the summary of the article, we are writing like how this article supports my idea or my form of justice which I choose.
I wouldn't do that yet. That's no. This one is just focusing on the article. All right, so you're going to read the article. You're going to talk about what you knew about the subject and how maybe you learned some. What did you learn from this that you didn't know about the subject? Then you're finding a passage in there, like some part of the article that you might have not really focused on, and then talk about what that part of the article is about and how it connects to the larger concept of the article. So you're not actually dealing with justice at all yet. They just want you to totally focus on whatever article you're going to pick, and you want to become very familiar with that article to the point where you're like, okay, I knew something about this subject. Here's what I knew, but here's what this article says, and then here's what this one specific paragraph talks about. Which I hadn't maybe thought about, and here's what the meaning of it is, and here's how it relates to the larger subject. Right? So I hadn't really thought about the fact that people are paying, student debt with when they're 70 years old, right? That there's these retirees who have to pay student debt still, for example, right? I'd find a paragraph that talks about that and be like, wow, investigate that. So your entire focus needs to be on just the article. I just introduced the justice idea because you're supposed to have read it and it's in your head, but that's not something you're really going to write about until next week is when you're going to make the connection. They just really want you to get in depth and very involved in understanding and articulating the ideas in the article that you choose. I hope that helps.
Like basically, we are reading the article in depth so that we can support it next week
Exactly.
in form of
Exactly.
justice.
Yep. Exactly. So you want to know everything about it and like get as much information and understanding of the article and of the subject that it's talking about from the article, so that then next week you can take that knowledge and be like, all right, I'm going to now look at these different types of justice and try to decide which one is I'm going to sort of use and connect and talk about. Exactly. That's exactly right. Um, yeah, good question though. Let's see here. Yeah, so anyway, that's about all I have for talkingness. That's a word from now on, talkingness. So you can ask any other question. This is a pretty, well, it depends where you are. For you guys, it's a pretty light week because you did the actual essay. Um,
Professor, did you upload those slides that you showed us tonight?
yeah, I think so. I uploaded them, but I don't. I'm gonna. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm hoping that they
Or
update themselves, right? Because I made a connection to them, and then let me see. Leave already.
I saw the first part, but like your examples and stuff, I don't think was
Are
uploaded.
there? Okay. I might have to like do some sort of refreshing thing. Okay, right. This is all the regular stuff. There's that. This is still all regular. That's regular. Example. Okay, no, my examples are up now. So it refreshed. Yeah, it refreshed it. So yeah, because I added that stuff. You're exactly right. So it refreshed it though. So it should be in the week 7 folder.
All right, thank you.
Yep. All right, guys. Yep.
So, like, I have a question, like, related to my writing style.
Hmm.
Like last week when I was like this week, and when I was writing my final draft, like my thesis was not really prepared. Like I was coming up with a thesis in the last minute because like I prepared my suggestion ideas
Right.
first,
Right.
and now I have to like form a thesis that's
Exactly.
like that.
Yes.
So
That's a great way to do it. That's sort of one of the ways. It's tough to explain to people, but I think that works. If you figure out what you're saying, and then like if you could figure out your three main points and sort of talk about those, and then you turn your attention to, okay, now the thesis is really just creating a sentence or two sentences that will tell people what's coming up. So that it's not a bad way to go if it works, right? Because you know what you're talking about. Like, so you write it. You're like, all right, I have these ideas. Now you're like, I need a thesis to present at the beginning, which is my conclusion. And now all I have to do is come up with language, like a statement or two, like a sentence, two sentences, whatever, that prepares the reader for what I actually talk about. So if that works, that's not a bad way to do it, because that's I've always had trouble with the idea that you sort of have a thesis that you create. So, because a thesis is a conclusion that you've drawn, right? And I only think we can really draw conclusions after we've read and written a whole bunch of stuff. Then we can draw a conclusion, and then we go, okay, that's the conclusion. But in this style, they sort of want you to give a conclusion and then go ahead and prove that. And I just my mind doesn't really work that way. So I think that could work. It's not a bad way to operate, really. If you can create, like, all right, here are my main argument ideas, and then now, how do I enter? Because the thesis is really just there to signal what's coming up, like what you're actually going to be talking about. So, yeah, I think it might work fine. I mean, when I look at it, I'll let you know. But I don't. It's as a style goes, as like a method, it's not. It's not a bad method at all, in my opinion, anyway. Yeah. All right. All right, guys. That's all I got.
Thank you, Professor.
You bet. Thanks for coming. I totally appreciate it. It's nice to talk to people.
Thank you.
Mm,
Have a great week.
yeah, you too. Take care. Have fun. Yes, thank you. Good night. Stop the.